Joseph has over 21 years of experience as a special agent with the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. Joseph was responsible for conducting complex criminal investigations which target drug cartels operating both domestically and internationally. Joseph also held the position of the DEA Division Security Officer responsible for conducting physical, personnel, and informational security assessments and audits for all DEA offices located within the DEA New England Field Division. Upon retirement from the federal government, Joseph was named as a Director of Compliance for the Medical Use of Marijuana program in Massachusetts. During that time, Joseph developed extensive knowledge in compliance and regulatory matters in the marijuana industry. Joseph was responsible for maintaining the integrity of the medical use of marijuana program and coordinated and directed all investigations and regulatory inquiries by the Department of Public. During Joseph's tenure at the medical use of marijuana program, registered medical marijuana dispensary licenses increased from 10 registered marijuana dispensaries to over 40.
So today we are joined with Joe Nicholson, and he spent 20 plus years with the DEA, and now he's in the cannabis industry. He worked on the inspection side, on the medical, for the medical program here in the state of Massachusetts, and then also now he's on the private side, working for a transportation company. So very, very excited to have Joe here. We got some great questions for him, and just happy to have him. So Joe, why don't you tell us a little about yourself, your location, years in the industry, past experience, things like that.
Absolutely, yeah. So in 1995, I signed on with the DEA. I was a special agent. I moved to Chicago. I was out there for approximately 6 years. Then I ended up coming back to Boston, finished out my career here with the DEA. Upon retirement, I actually applied for a job. It was under the Department of Public Health, and it was for the Director of Compliance position for the medical use of marijuana programs. So I applied for that, and I got the job. And I did that for 2 years, which was very enlightening. It was a new program. There was a lot of moving parts to that, obviously. And, obviously, eventually they merged with the CCC, and I did not make that move. I was with the medical use of marijuana program in Massachusetts for about 2 years, and then I jumped over to the private sector with Plymouth Armor Group, and we're a full-service cash and product transportation solution for the cannabis industry in Massachusetts. So that's where I am today. I've enjoyed, the industry and kind of being on both sides of it, and got to open my eyes about all the opportunities out there, the jobs it brings to the communities, things like that.
Absolutely. So you had mentioned that you had applied for the medical program, early on. What was that process like for you? Basically knowing about the job and what sparked the interest?
Yeah, it was. I was looking to retire from the DEA, and I saw the job advertised, and I thought, well, it's a totally new program in Massachusetts. And I said, well, I have some experience in Ulysses. I also, in addition to being a special agent, I was also for the DEA in charge of all the security for the New England offices. So I knew a lot about the regulatory structure. The DEA and the FBI were all under the Department of Justice. And post 9/11, they installed all these regulations that we had to comply with as all the DEA and FBI are building security. So I thought I could parlay that over to this position, and it worked out nicely. We had a really good run there. We opened a lot of medical marijuana dispensaries. And now the program obviously is just, it's taken off. It's a slow process, but it's, as you know, there's a lot of applications in there, and it's going to continue to grow.
Right. No, that's a good point. That's actually one of the questions I have for you. With legalization in 33 states, a lot of people here in the nation have access to whether it's medical cannabis or adult use cannabis. What kind of do you see the role as the DEA being in legalization, especially since the states are different, and it's not
right
one size fits all across the nation. So how do you see the DEA, playing a role?
Yeah, so right now, for the most part, of course, I'm not their spokesman. This is my opinion. And, so for the most part, they're really not changing anything right now. So everyone knows the marijuana is a Schedule 1. Right now it's in the Schedule 1 drug, and that means it's, of course, highly addictive and no medical use. Well, obviously people want to get it out of there, and they want to move it down to, to give you an idea, it's in the same schedule as heroin, right? So I think the move is to get it out of there, and there are a few ways to do that. The DEA could administratively, through petitions to them, they could change that. And then, of course, Congress and the legislature could change that. But I think that's the first initial step, would have to be taken out of Schedule 1. And then it's going to open up research and things like that. I mean, for years, the DEA has used University of Mississippi to conduct research and development on marijuana. But right now, you're starting to see that they're going to open that up. And I think that's the key. Once there's more research done on the drug and it's science-based, I think it's going to be accepted more readily, into society.
Absolutely. This is a question for my social here. Yep. What happens with seized marijuana with the DEA? Does it go to Mississippi to get tested?
That's a great question. So when you seize any drugs, whether it's cocaine or marijuana, I mean, that's usually part of a larger investigation. And what happens that the drugs will go into evidence and wait for the trial to start if there is a trial. And then once the trial is adjudicated, or the individual, at the end of the day, the drugs are taken to an incinerator, and they're burnt and they're destroyed. So that's what happens with all, and we're talking mainly bulk marijuana. I remember I was on the job one year in Chicago, and they'd kind of wait, and instead of doing, we call them burn runs every week, you'd wait till it build up. And I remember we were on an army truck, and we were driving through the streets of Chicago, and I think we had 1,000 kilos of coke and like 800 pounds of marijuana, and we had a lot of cars and weapons, but we would go. It was a kind of an eye opener. Chicago's bigger than Boston. There's a lot more going on there. But so basically, you take them into all administrative process, and we see you take them, and you have the drugs destroyed. But it's a good question. They don't recycle them back into society or anything like that.
That's interesting. Do you was that one of the worst cases you've seen? What you had just explained with the cocaine and the marijuana there?
No, that was. I mean, there was a lot of good cases, and that was a large amount. And that was built up over time. And I guess that's another story. Chicago is, I worked out there for 6 years, and our main focus. And honestly, Ulysses, the federal government, as far as active cases, if you're a DEA agent, you're looking to take cocaine cases or heroin cases, and I'm even going back 20 years. I don't think I really did a marijuana case, because the U.S. attorneys also drive what we do to a certain extent, because it's them who prosecute it. Right. So, if you did a marijuana case, usually there was either a lot of money affiliated with that case, or there was a murder involved in it. So there was other extenuating circumstances. And for the most part, in the DEA, at our level, we're looking at the cocaine, the cartels from Mexico, and things like that, and it's with the marijuana, it was, our bosses were like, hey, we want you making these cases, with the cocaine and heroin and methamphetamine and things like that.
Absolutely. I would think that, like, the marijuana itself, it's almost like the causation. Of course, you're probably going to have those other drugs alongside with it. You know what I mean? Just because they're all illegal. But I can't imagine, like, it just being marijuana. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, no, it is, and it's true. It's just, it wasn't a priority with the federal government when you took these cases to the U.S. attorney, and they didn't really want to see that. And our bosses were like, hey, focus on, we did wiretaps, Ulysses, and we'd connect with, when I was in Chicago, would try to identify the command and control centers for these cartels, and it involved wiretaps in LA, Chicago, New York, Miami, and that's what we were doing. We really weren't looking at marijuana, at our level. Now, as you know, when you get down to the state and local, sometimes, the street dealers may get targeted more.
Right.
We were looking kind of for the command and control people that brought in the 2,000 pounds, 5,000 pounds. And even then, again, they weren't going to trial those cases, because it was marijuana, and it's I think things will change soon, though,
No, absolutely. With the DEA now, and in your experience, how do you guys work with local law enforcement, and how is that relationship do you see going forward with legalization?
Yeah, that's a great question. So historically, the DEA has established what we call task force, and they're spread out throughout the country. So basically, a task force may look like you'd have a DEA agent or one or two. You'd have a few local cops from different police departments, and maybe a few state police. Could be a housing and urban development agent or policeman, and would all work simultaneously together. That was probably funded by the federal government. Federal government, as everyone knows, has the deepest pockets. So, they're located throughout the country, and it's basically federal agents. There's drug task force, there's gun task force, and they work together. They all bring different resources to the table, state, local, and federal, all the databases, information, what they know about, maybe people we're looking at in the area. So it's a way to kind of get everyone to be cooperative and collaborative, and again, in a lot of those task force, you're trying to, with the DEAs involved, you're trying to get the highest violator you can. You're not looking for the street person. You you want the command and control structure.
Right. Yeah, it seems pretty obvious that, the DEA, FBI, you guys are more concerned with like the higher level guys, when, the local police force, I mean, they'll bust guys for possession, you know what I mean? And just like little minor stuff. So I think that's very interesting, how you guys work with them. What would you say for law enforcement is a transferable skill? I think you touched on this a little bit, talking about your experience, especially with security-wise for the DEA. What would you say is like one of the, maybe a few or one of the top things that transfer for law enforcement into the cannabis industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the overall, when you're in the field, you're a special agent. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you're dealing sensitive information, classified information, regulatory structure, laws. So in the cannabis industry, Ulysses, there are going to be a lot of jobs out there for everyone, whether it's being in the director of security or, which is even more important, is the compliance. So you learn how to read the regulations, and that's what you do for 20 years as an agent in the laws. And now, as you know, the CCC has their own regulations. So you can parlay that over with your knowledge. You know how to read elements of a crime. You know how to read regulations and statutes. So you can go to work for a lot of these companies and keep them in compliance. I don't know if you saw last week, the CCC fined 3 entities, marijuana establishment, totaling $800,000. Well, if you have a good compliance person there, Ulysses, there's no reason that you'd ever get fined that amount of money, because you'd vet and really look at and research, do your due diligence on what you do as a company. And so I think a lot of those skills in law enforcement, and that's not to say that, if you go out and you write tickets all day and that's all you do, you're going to come over and it's going to be an easy transition. Right. It's like anything. You have to really try to hone your skills. Law enforcement offers a lot of classes, in-service training, and you have to be aggressive, and you have to want to go out and do that and learn. And it's like any job in America, right? It's how well you want to do it, right, and how hard you want to work at it.
Right. No, that's a great response. I agree. I mean, our head of security guy, he's a veteran. Actually, he's a lawyer too at this point. He just graduated.
Right.
But just his experience in serving the country and just his network has been a tremendous asset for us to get through.
And that's a great point, Ulysses. The whole networking and connecting, and you do have a lot of networking. And if you're in an area in Worcester, let's take Worcester. They have really a ton of applications out that way. Right. And if you have 6 different security directors, maybe there's, people organizing a little to try to, rob an establishment. These people all know each other if they were in law enforcement, and right, they can talk and pass on information. Because if something happens to you, or if you get a tip at your location and you don't tell anyone else that, I have information that these 5 people are looking at doing this, and you don't pass that on to your counterparts, it's no good. You have to have those open lines of communication.
Absolutely, absolutely. Going back to what you had said about any job in America and having the mentality of actually doing, a good job, what would you say to officers that don't believe in marijuana, still think it belongs in Schedule 1, it's addictive? Because I think one of the coolest things about you is that you transition well and you're open to it, but not everyone's like that in law enforcement.
Yeah, there's an old saying, the train left the station, and we hear that in the industry now. And I'll tell you this, there in this industry throughout the country, not just in Massachusetts, people that were in law enforcement are taking these jobs, and they want to do it for the right reasons. They want to, make sure the entity they're working for is secure. But to get to your question, yeah, I mean, as you said to me earlier, in 33 states, it's legal, on the medical side. And we all know this, Ulysses, once it gets legal medically, we all know what the next step is. It's going to be adult use or recreation. That's just the way it's going now. And I think it's train left the station. It's coming down the pike. They're just going to have to embrace it. I know a lot of the chiefs have issues, but there are a lot of chiefs out there that these marijuana establishments deal with, and they reach out to them and they say, look, this is my security plan. We hired this guy. We're serious. They just don't want to see kind of the Wild West, where, marijuana is going out the back door when it's not supposed to be. And I understand their concerns, but I think if, it's done the right way and they look at the security plans, as there's cameras, everything's tracked in the metric, and you do audits every day and inventory. So I think the industry is getting legitimized now, and I think they will see that, honestly, as we keep moving forward. Pretty soon you're going to have most states, that are going to have it legal.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like the states that, especially we look at like a New York that's bordering Massachusetts, New Jersey that's close as well in proximity. Those states are almost in representation like a Boston with a slow rollout, partly because Boston's looking at it from an equity perspective.
Right.
That's probably one of the reasons that Boston doesn't have as many, dispensaries as maybe a Worcester or other cities. What are some ideas that you have around like over-policed, neighborhoods? Because that's, we look at, again, New York, there's an article, they still have disparities to this day for arrests and fines, even though they've decriminalized marijuana. So what are your ideas around, improving those communities that have been over?
Yeah, no, good question. I think first and foremost in every aspect of law enforcement is training, and things change every day, and the country's changing, and there has to be training that is available to all of the local police departments. And part of that training, I think, is learning the culture of where they are, the cities of that they're working in, that they build relationships with people in those communities and they understand their culture, where they're coming from. It's just going to give them, in law enforcement, if you get into situations, you'll hear people say their best asset is how they speak to people and how they talk to people and communicate. And I mean, de-escalation, that's what I'm talking about. You go out, you use your mouth, you talk. That's the best way to get out of any situation or to break down the barriers. But I think a lot of it, and there has to be training on biases and prejudices and stereotypes. Those have to be left at the door. And I think they will focus. We know what's going on in the country right now, and I think they will focus on that because, law enforcement, they do a lot of different jobs. And, you're trained everything from SWAT to entry to, some of it's paramilitary. I think you will see through the culture that they will get that training on stereotypes, inner city policing, things like that, and give the officers the tools of understanding what's going on in that community in downtown Chicago, New York, or LA, and where the people are coming from. But it does revolve around training, so the officers have tools in their tool belt.
Yeah. I think that's a great correlation with what's going on in the nation now. I mean, obviously we know with the protests and the killing of George Floyd that police brutality and everything that's going on is in question.
Absolutely, everything's on the table right now. Yeah,
basically. Like I Personally, I'm surprised to see a lot of the initiative of defunding and how fast we got there. You know,
Right.
like there are some serious talks of that. So I was hoping to get your perspective on what's the good and the bad of that. Like, you know, how does that all work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm a little nervous about it. And, you know, I guess at the end of the day, everyone said, you know, what does defunding mean? So people are saying, does that mean we're going to have no more police? And, you know, which I don't think obviously is an option, especially with my background, but I think most people are going to tell you that it's not. Maybe a better word is reallocating it. And if there is funding, like I said, with the training and, you know, the police do so much. It's a very difficult job. They deal with the homeless and, you know, people that use heroin every day and they get called out. And so, you know, I've read maybe we take that off their plate and we have social workers who may do that and EMTs who go out and, you know, connect with the homeless person on the street and keep it at, you know, the interaction a low level. Because police are trained a certain way, obviously, and if things get aggressive, you know, they're going to do their job and do what they have to do. But if you have those other people who have probably better training in the social area of it, and if you have them interacting, that may help with everything. You know, it's as you said, it's still evolving. The police play a role also in the proactive measures. So if there are police in your neighborhood, Ulysses, there people see them, a car drive by, that may be a deterrent. But I think they have to do more than that. I think they have to be engaged with the community. And as I told you, I grew up in Lynn on the North Shore. And when I grew up, they had different programs and collaborative programs. They'd open a gym at night. You could play basketball. The police would have a team, and, you know, you get together with the neighborhoods, and that builds some pretty good bonds. And, you know, who knows, that the individual you're playing basketball with, maybe 8 years from them, you may come into a situation where you meet each other, but you're going to have something in common there, and a bond. I understand, you know, look, the big cities, it's you know, you have millions of people that live there. It's tough to do, but I think it does start at just knowing the community you're in, and the culture that's there. And again, training it all comes back to that.
Right. So with the training, we talk a little bit about the funding.
Yeah.
And, you know, just with the cannabis stuff, I mean, we see some companies putting their HCAs and their PIPs that they want to give money to the police department. Do you believe that tax dollars should go to local police departments? Do you believe that companies should, you know, basically pay the police?
Well, I'll tell you this. I think it's a great question, and once the federal government, and this is, again, out of Schedule 1, when marijuana comes out of Schedule 1, I think the cannabis tax will be really great for the inner city, because I think a lot of money should be directed there for these social programs, community-based programs, and the cannabis money can go to those departments. You know, police get funded by, you know, the city they're in or the state, and that's good. And also there's you know, with the DEA, this is off track a little, but we have something called asset sharing. So if we work a case with, I was in Chicago, we worked a case with the local police department. Well, we seized $2 million in the attic of a house in Chicago. They got 15% of that. So if you do the math, that's a good chunk of change. And it's all asset sharing program. And, you know, it's $300,000-$400,000. Now, not every department gets that, but I really, you hit it in the head with the cannabis and the tax. And I think even if it did fund any police programs, again, I think those should be geared and aimed at the community that they're working in.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I think, when the, you know, again, when the defunding comes in place, and it's kind of crazy to see, you know, the certain salaries and like the percentage, you know, of what, compared to like a social worker or a public, you know what I mean? Like public health administration, things like that.
Right.
So it's, I would agree with you. If there's training around the inner cities, those who have been harmed by prohibition, I think that's a good way of spending money. It's just I feel a little bit different when I see the HCAs and the PIPs talking about, you know what I mean? These entities that are going to, you know, these private entities are going to directly give money to the police department. We don't know what that money's going toward. You know.
Right. Right.
So, all right, cool. So now we got a couple speed questions here. And
Okay. Yeah.
Again, I appreciate you getting into the nitty gritty there. So you're an ex-DEA agent. What is, if any, your favorite drug movie, marijuana movie of all time, if you have one?
So I'd say, have you seen the movie Blow with Johnny Depp?
Yes, it's been a while, but that's a good one.
Yeah, that's an old. Well, I'm older than you, but I remember that when it came out, and of course that has a Boston tie to it. Yeah, so George Jung was, if you Google him, I think it's Jung. He grew up in Weymouth. He was a typical kid. He played football. He got into the marijuana industry out in, now this is in the 70s, I think, early 70s, out in L.A., and his next step in his organization that he started was he was going to start flying shipments of cocaine back from Colombia.
Right.
So he was, it kind of strikes me as odd, but a Boston kid who eventually was on Pablo Escobar's ranch and,
wow,
flying cocaine back for Pablo Escobar. So I'm like, how did he go from the Weymouth to, one of the biggest drug dealers in the world and an icon? So I thought it was an interesting story. And, Johnny Depp did a great job with it.
That happened in real life, is what you're saying.
Yeah, George Jung. Real brief, I'll tell you this. I think he did do 20 years, Ulysses, and he came back. And like a lot of people in Boston, he ended up going down to Cape. And a friend of mine was on the DEA down there, and he got back into the marijuana. Now, this is like almost he's in retirement job, right? So he got back in marijuana. The problem is when you have they seized it and, they arrested him. And the problem is once you have that original conviction, right, or, the three strike, as we've heard. So he ended up going back to jail. I think he's actually out now and he's, in the Boston area, but he did go back for that marijuana in his house. He probably thought, hey, no one's really going to care. But the problem was it's still federally illegal.
Right.
And he already had those two other strikes. Wow. So he got an automatic sentence.
Was that recently?
That, I'm going to say 90s or, in the 90s. But it's interesting. It's an interesting story. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what about music? Favorite musician, favorite genre?
Yeah, hands down, Bruce Springsteen.
Okay.
So I was in college, 81, 85, and that's all anyone listened to. I went to school in Springfield, Massachusetts, and I listened to the Boss. And what's that?
Bruce is a Massachusetts guy too, right?
Bruce?
Yeah. Is he?
Oh, New Jersey.
New Jersey. Okay.
Yeah, New Jersey. So I really like his songs. I told him at my family when I drive him in the car, I always flip him on, and that's not who they want to listen to. So.
So what about books? What are you reading? What has really helped you navigate your career? Maybe one book that's helped you navigate your career.
Oh, geez. I've been so busy with everything lately, but I'll go way back to, it was about the Boston Mafia.
Okay.
And I'm dating myself, but it was 1985. It was the Italian Mafia in Boston, Gennaro and Giulio. And I forget the name of the book, but it basically described how the FBI agents in Boston conducted a wiretap in the north end of Boston on the Italian Mafia. And it wasn't easy because everyone in there knew Gennaro and Giulio and his crew. And it really interested me. And I got out of college then, and I actually went to the court where they let you sit there with headphones in and listen to all of they put a bug in their building.
Wow.
in their office. So you literally heard, there was I think he had 5 brothers, and you could literally hear all the conversations going on in there and how they built the case. So as I said earlier, I was really interested, in law enforcement when I was younger. And
absolutely. But now you're slinging cannabis.
Yeah, legally.
Nah, seriously. You're in the cannabis industry now. Do you smoke? And when was the first age that you started smoking?
No, I don't. No. And just to touch on what I was saying, I knew very early on I wanted to go into the DEA or FBI at that time, and I was 16 years old. So I knew what the entrance requirements were and things like that. So I never smoked, and I've never done anything. But I'm not adverse. Like just personally, I don't think I'd ever smoke it. I just
Right.
I've never smoked cigarettes. And however, if I don't sleep well, and I know the cannabis products have, and just being in the industry, and I hear all the stories firsthand. I know a lot of the senior managers in the industry here, and things like tinctures and things like that.
Right.
I'd have no problem doing that. I still may do it. I'm getting older, but I don't sleep well. I may take some of that, and I know the Indica is better.
Right.
So learning everything, but it's I'm not going to rule it out.
That's cool. Well, let me know.
Yeah, I will.
I'll keep you updated.
I won't lose my clearance. See, when I was in the DEA, obviously you have a clearance, and
Right.
You have to have. They kind of really do a significant background on you for you to get that. So it's.
Are you still subject to that, even though you're retired?
No, it lasts for 5 years. When you get out, your clearance will last for 5 years through the feds there. But I'm all done with that. It's.
What about guys that are like undercovers, and they're kind of like in that perspective of having to blend in? How does that work?
That's a great question, Ulysses. So no matter what drug you're talking about, I knew a lot of guys in Chicago who did undercover work, and in Boston, and that question always comes up. But here's the problem, and that's why the best undercover agents think the best on their feet. Because if you're in a situation, if you're sitting around a table and they offer you cocaine and you do it, in court, you're going to have some major issues.
Right.
So you can't go in and say, well, I did it because I was undercover. They're going to laugh at you, and that's not going to work. Yeah. So it's a great question, but if you do that, I mean, the case is pretty much gone.
Right.
You wouldn't be able to move. Yeah. So, unless there was other evidence you can bring separate from that you wouldn't introduce that. Right. But it's a great question. Everyone asks that, and you see it in the movies. It's kind of glamorized. Hey, are you a cop? No, do this. Do this cocaine, do the marijuana. But I know, and again, I'm not a DEA spokesman, but you don't do that. Yeah. You have to talk. Whether it's this, Ulysses. Look, I'm a business guy. I don't do it. Everything that is in my body, I'm careful. I just want to make money. You want to do business with me or not? That's what we're here for. You're not here to watch me do drugs. You want my money. Right. And I will tell you this, at the end of the day, Ulysses, most of the people you're dealing with and brokering deals with, when they see the money, they're going to do the deal because they want the money. That's what happens at the end.
Yeah. No, I was telling you a little bit earlier, I met, ironically enough, the week after you came by, there was a gentleman who was a 40-year Worcester cop.
He was what?
His 40-year Worcester cop. He had just retired maybe like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And he was telling me how he worked with you guys, the DEA. It might not have been you directly, obviously.
But the DEA, yeah.
Yeah, basically. And he's like, listen, they ended up giving me like 80 pounds of weed, and I had to sell it to these guys in Worcester. But he basically said the same thing, that like they weren't under suspicion as soon as they saw what they were there for.
Yeah.
It made it like, you know what I mean, super easy for them to get through it. So I thought it was interesting to have this local cop tell me a story about him getting weed. He didn't know that we were, planning to put up our location there at Al Milgren.
Right. So was he selling or buying? Did he tell you?
He was selling. So he had weed from the DEA, and then he knew some local Worcester guys. This was probably in the 70s or 80s.
Okay, yeah.
Local Worcester guys. So he was selling it to those Worcester guys.
Yeah, that's called the reverse. So a typical deal is when you're in law enforcement, you purchase narcotics or drugs.
Right.
This is someone wants to buy from you. It's called the reverse undercover sting operation. And what will happen is the law enforcement entity will seize the money at the end of the day. So if they're going to do the deal and the guy says, hey, I got $300,000 in my trunk for that.
Right.
Obviously, as soon as you make the transaction, the gig's up, and they'll take all his money. And we go back to what I told you about the asset sharing program. Yeah. So those local departments or whoever worked on that will get a piece of that money.
Yeah, no, he was part of it.
Yeah.
Guy, man. He's an interesting guy.
I may know him.
You probably do. So I think you touched on the last question here. I would guess that in Indica, if you were a strand of marijuana, you'd be Indica to help you sleep at night.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be it. And as you know, I think, and again, I'm learning a lot about the industry. Everyone is, it's new, but I know a lot of these marijuana establishments, Ulysses, are like, they literally have labs
Right.
and science centers in their facilities, and everyone's looking for that perfect strain and, the next hot thing, that people are really going to talk about. And so I know the strains continue to evolve.
Right.
And that's there's going to be more and more. But I guess it's like anything. If you have the best product, if someone produces the best product through their lab and they're testing,
right,
and everyone wants that, that's the next big thing.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. I think what came to mind is you familiar with GW Pharmaceuticals?
Oh yeah.
So they got the model. They make one sativa. That's it.
Yeah.
And
and that got approved, correct, by the FDA?
I think so. Recently.
Yes. And I think it helps with seizures and,
right,
and things like that. The oil and they're a legit company, and so that kind of broke the door down a little for the DEA, the FDA. They're letting them do that, and that's
right,
still cannabis. There's more probably than 0.03% THC in there.
Right.
And
so they had to get approved by the DEA for that?
They could have had a hand in it. I know the FDA was huge, but I will say this. I think they did it in a way that they approved them for that substance that they're working on. So
Absolutely.
I don't think the rest of the entire industry can do it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Into the cannabis.
No,
but I think at the end, the research and the development is going to open a lot of different doors, because people talk about pesticides, and I hear cultivators complain that, to produce a good plant, you should be able to put pesticide on early that are, organic and that aren't harmful, because all the marijuana at the end of the day, Ulysses, is tested.
right,
Samples of it in the labs in Massachusetts. So I think at the end, once the research comes in and how pesticides interact, how with marijuana, how other things interact with marijuana, you need a base, you need a record, you need a scientific record. And once that's there, then I think you're going to see a lot more doors open up. And going back to the University of Mississippi, I think Harvard and MIT is getting involved in this now about research. And I think now everyone sees a light at the end of the tunnel that, hey, this is going to be legal. And
right,
let's let everyone take a shot at this and try to do it right. And I think the DEA is also allowing that, because it used to just be University of Mississippi. That was it for 20 years. Now they're going to open the door to the bigger companies and venues.
No, that's great. That's great. Well, yeah. I mean, from my perspective, it's all about figuring out equity. I mean, that we're in the equity program.
Yep, absolutely.
So, that's what this class is about, and I'm excited. Again, Joe, I appreciate your time. One of the things that we were just talking about is just the fact that, there are going to be students in this course that work for municipalities, that work for the state, and essentially, your perspective is very valuable. So thank you so much for your time today.
I appreciate it, and I got a lot out of this also. And like I said, anytime we can, I can come out. My last position, just so you know, with the DEA, I actually was the recruiter. So I would go around to New England and I'd recruit the
That's
state,
cool.
local. So if people are interested there, let me know, and I can speak to that as well about what those agencies are looking for if you have people who want to get into law enforcement.
Absolutely, that's great. Thanks again, Joe.
It was great to speak with Joe. Certainly value and appreciate his experience and his perspective on things. Not all ex-law enforcement, whether it be DEA, local, state police, would have the same mindset. And, many of them could still very well be in that position of not in my backyard and wouldn't embrace it as much as Joe has. So I think that's cool that he's open to obviously working in this space. But then on the other side is that he's definitely provided information and resources to my business as a social program or economic empowerment or social equity business, basically just being able to say, hey, I want to be able to help you guys out as much as I can. So, and that's very much telling of, how I got the interview with him today. So shout out to Joe, and I hope you guys enjoyed the session today.